Elephant is so important, and here in South Africa, I give this elephant all of my heart.
Sadly, in Africa, elephant populations have plummeted over the last 7 years. We want to make a difference by moving large numbers of elephants across great distances to areas either where they lived or where their populations are in decline.
We do have an overpopulation of elephants at the VLNR, but in Mozambique, where we will be moving the elephants to, we do have a shortage of elephants. Ultimately, we are looking at translocating 200 elephants from the Venetia Limpopo Nature Reserve to Mozambique. We are the first company to conduct translocation of such a huge number of elephants.
It's our baby. That's our baby.
The success of what we do in these translocations is in taking cohesive family groups from the matriarch down to the smallest calf.
What a loaded truck now. You can hear that she's cry. She's crying now. She said, Daddy, I'm leaving.
Now we are ready to receive our elephants coming from South Africa.
The fact that De Beers has done this and they've put their money where their mouths are really and made a difference for these animals, but certainly for the environments in which we live and which we work, is a great example for what other companies should be doing.
Good afternoon and good morning, everyone around the world and in the room. Thanks very much for joining us today to talk about a very special thing. You may know that today is World Elephant Day, and it's very appropriate on a day when the world comes together to talk about how we can do more to conserve the population of these magnificent elephant, that we hear a little bit more about the amazing Moving Giants program of the De Beers Group, and we have a very special guest here to tell us the detail in a minute. You should have seen a Glisser code, which is on the screen in front of you now. Please download that if you haven't already, and please send us questions. Once we've heard from Kester, I'm going to ask him a few questions, but I'd really much rather have your questions. So please send questions in, either on the Glisser link or on the Facebook page if you are following us on the Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you. As I was saying to Kester at lunch, if we had this conversation 5 years ago, or if we'd even suggested Moving Giants 5 years ago, people, I think, around the world might have thought we'd lost our senses. But I think it shows you how fast the world has moved on and how much conservation has become not a nice to have, but a mission critical for, I think, all businesses, but particularly De Beers, that we have been able to do what we've done over the last 2 years. And we'll continue to do this in the next relocation. For those of you who don't know the full story, let me just tell you a little bit of it, and then I'll ask Kester to take you through what they actually did. For us, our sustainability strategy, which we call Building Forever, has got a number of really, really core fundamentals to it. One of them, as you know, is protecting the natural world, which is what Moving Giants is about. And protecting the natural world is exactly what it says, protecting the natural world. For me and for the whole of the De Beers Group, the sustainability strategy and all parts of it, particularly this one, are no longer what they might have been 20 or 30 years ago, which is something you maybe did on the side once a week for a couple of hours. For me, and I think for all of us, I know I speak for all of you when I say this, that this is absolutely core business to us now. The world has changed so much. Sustainability strategies are going to be what make companies winning companies in the future against those that aren't. And in our world, it's even more important for reasons I think you all know why we do this better than anybody else does it. If you think about the natural world, we undeniably disturb land when we mine. And we have a very clear strategy around protecting the natural world in order to compensate, and not just compensate, do much more than the disturbances that we do for the environment around us. So I think you know that we have a policy that says around in Southern Africa, for every 1 acre of ground that we disturb, we have 6 pristine acres around that, across all over the country, from the Makwaland to the Kalahari to the Venetia Reserve, which we'll talk about, all over the places that we mine through the diamond route. And it's very deliberate, this. It's very much about promoting and sustaining the natural diamond. And if you think about it, of course, we're a natural diamond business. We explore for, we mine, we sort, we value, we sell maybe the most precious thing that the earth has ever given up. And it is so valuable because of exactly that. It's real, it's rare, and it's finite. And it has such an enormous attraction for consumers because of those reasons. And I think for me, if that isn't a clear reason why we shouldn't do more to protect the natural world, because it is so linked to the brand and it is so linked to everything that De Beers stands for, that, as I said earlier, this isn't a nice to have. This is part of the core business of De Beers, all the pieces of the sustainability strategy, and in particular, protecting the natural world. Now, you'll know, of course, that diamond mines are very safe places. We like them to be safe. We don't like people stealing our diamonds from us. Turns out that there's been a rather interesting side effect of having such safe mines, in that the reserves, the nature reserves that we have around the mines, are also rather safe. And so at Venetia, where we have a reserve, the Venetia Limpopo Nature Reserve, it's about 32,000 acres. When we started it some 25 years ago, it had 40 elephant in it. And the carrying capacity of that reserve is 70 elephant. And when we started moving giants, there were 270 elephant in it. So a very safe place for elephant to be, but a bit too safe because they've been breeding very successfully. And the problem with that is they do cause environmental damage, not just to the obvious and to the naked eye when you go and look in the reserve at some of the habitat destruction, but it has very significant impact on other creatures and flora and fauna that live in the area. So we thought long and hard about how to solve this problem. Many people have tried to solve the problems of overpopulation of elephant in southern Africa. It's a very difficult problem to solve. And we came up with this wonderful idea of moving giants, which was led by Kester, who I'll introduce in a minute, to move over 3 winters 200 elephant from the Venetia Limpopo Nature Reserve, 1,700 kilometers across a country into Mozambique, to repopulate a reserve there that not only has the carrying capacity for more elephant, but really wants more elephant. So a wonderful thing to do, unbelievably ambitious, quite risky in some senses, because I don't think one of this scale and distance has been done yet. But it has been spectacularly successful so far. We've also had to commit a lot of money to it. We've budgeted to spend $1.8 million on this over the 5-year period, of which $500,000 is used to train the rangers in the Zanav Reserve in Mozambique, where the elephant have been moved to in conservation, but also in things like anti-poaching techniques. So it's been a mammoth exercise for the De Beers Group. I think it's been really, really critical for the brand and to build the visibility of the sustainability strategy. And I think everyone involved has done a tremendous job. And we're very privileged today to have Kester Vickery from Conservation Solutions, who, as you will see by the end of today, is actually a rock star in the making. And he has led this amazing translocation. So I'm going to ask, I'm not talk anymore, I'm going to ask Kester to come up and talk us through a little presentation on what he's been able to do for us, and then we're going to ask Kester a few questions, and I'd love to have some questions from you so that I can put those to Kester. Kester? Let me sit down, actually. Sit down here.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's indeed a huge privilege for me to be standing here in front of you on what is known as World Elephant Day. And for me, it's a really bizarre moment. I catch elephants for a living, standing here in London in front of all of you in a totally different industry. But the link, of course, between all of us is your moving giant story, which we have been a part of. And it's not only a good story, it really is a story of hope, and I want to share that with you today. But firstly, I need to paint a picture of our conservation situation back in Africa. And if you look at a concise map of Africa, you will see all of the different countries, there are little green dots, and those depict the legislated protected areas in sorry. So these green areas depict the legislated protected areas in these countries. And the reason why I tell you is that if you had to go to some of these protected areas in these countries, quite often the management is very variable, and in some cases absolutely no wildlife is left even in them. And a lot of this has happened recently. And the reason I tell you this is that elephants are a keystone species in many of these areas. They occur pretty much, or used to occur, over most of the continent. They are not only vital to the ecosystems in which they live, but I'll give you an example. Some seeds of trees cannot germinate without going through the intestine of an elephant. They trim the bush so that other animals get to eat some of the other vegetation. These are a few of the things that they do in these ecosystems. Not only are they key to these ecosystems, but they are also indicators of the health of the systems that we live. And in our world of concrete and glass, we need these green areas because our own survival depends on it. They produce the oxygen that we need to live. So not only if you protect elephants, are you protecting elephants, but you're protecting other species and, of course, the ecosystems, as I say, which are key to our own existence. So about 100-odd years ago, elephants pretty much occurred all over Africa. There were millions. They were ubiquitous. They lived from north to south. And this has changed to a point where more recently it is thought that there are only 350,000 elephants left on the continent, a massive decline. In the last 7 or 8 years alone, there's been a 30% decline in the global, on the continental population of elephants, and a massive decline. And you don't have to be good at maths to see where we're headed. So not only would it be a tragedy, but it would also be an indictment on all of us and the human species as a whole if we lost elephants on our watch. So it's not all bad news, though. There are some countries in southern Africa, about 5 countries at least, that have either stable or growing populations of elephants. This is due to good conservation management and conservation efforts in these areas. But the South African scenario is very different. Most of our wildlife areas are fenced. And the reason I tell you is, the reason why these areas are fenced is, one, to protect not only the wildlife within these areas, but also the wildlife without. And what is important to note is that these animals can't migrate. There is no way that they can move from one area where there are too many to another area. One, because of the fence, obviously, but secondly, generally, because these areas are surrounded by a sea of humanity. So they have no way of getting from an area, one area to another. This particular picture was taken at Venetia Limpopo Reserve, one of your reserves. So as a consequence, as you get consequences for bad conservation management, there are also consequences for good conservation management. And one of the consequences is logically an increase in the population of the animals. These areas are not managed for one species. They can't be. They're managed for biodiversity, everything that lives in that system. So if you get to a point where one species, and we refer specifically to elephants, have increased to a point where they are damaging the ecosystem and affecting other species, you have to intervene and do something because they can't go anywhere. So, so there's a couple of management strategies available to us currently. How do you reduce these populations? So there's the option of culling, or to reduce the population, but given what I've just told you about the decline in elephant numbers on the continent, it just doesn't make sense, and I definitely don't think it fits in with your brand. Contraception is another option, but it's only really practical in small populations, and it doesn't reduce the population. It just slows population growth. So also not a long-term solution. And then translocation, which is a new thing we've been doing for not so long, is the more recent method and available to us to be able to move elephants from one place to another, and what I term a human-induced migration. So your Venetia Limpopo Reserve is one such fenced reserve. It was, as David said to you, it was established around the mine as a buffer zone. It has a very unique landscape. In South African terms, it's quite big. It's close to 80,000 acres, I think.
And in the early 1990s, a founder group of 30-odd elephants was translocated there, and they've increased to the point where they are just short of 300. And they, at this stage, have in essence become a victim of their own success. They've started to alter the habitat and making a big difference to the detriment of other species in this particular area. So Piet Oosthuizen from your De Beers ecology zone set out to try and find a suitable recipient for these elephants, because moving them would be better than shooting them. So he then engaged with the Peace Parks Foundation, and lucky for us is that they have entered into a management contract with the Mozambican government to manage Zenav National Park. Zenav is a really incredible landscape. It's massive. It's more than 1 million acres in extent. It had lots of wildlife 30 years ago, and sadly they were all shot out during the Civil War 25, 30 years ago. The Peace Parks Foundation now has taken over management of this area, and their mission is not only to protect but to rewild this area, and elephants are one of the species that would be a key introduction as part of their rewilding process. So De Beers engaged with Peace Parks, and we try to put a program together for the translocation of these elephants. But how do you go about moving 200 elephants across 1,000 miles, across an international boundary and unpaved roads? A massive, massive challenge. So De Beers engaged with me, with my company, Conservation Solutions, and we chatted at length as how best to do this. We had done similar translocations, and certainly bigger ones in terms of number, but none as challenging in terms of the terrain we had to catch. Venetia is really difficult, the logistics involved, and more importantly, the distances. We have never moved elephants this far ever. So a massive, massive, massive undertaking, and one we were really nervous about, to be honest. But how do you start with a project like this? And I think with any operation, it starts with planning. I typically say that at least 90% of our time is spent on the planning and only 10% in the execution. The execution is the fun bit for us, but it takes, in the reserves themselves, there is a lot of work that had to be done, both in Zenav and in Venetia. Werner, the reserve manager in Venetia, spent months fixing roads and making access possible into the area where the elephants are, so that we can drive with 50-ton rigs to be able to catch and recover these elephants. The paperwork is immense. You're taking elephants across a border. There's lots of international laws that we need to abide by. We need ministerial approvals on the South African side, so there's a heap of planning and paperwork that went into it. And then more importantly, our equipment. We had to adjust and change a lot of our equipment to do this operation. And it's not stuff we can go and buy off the shelf or go to a mining warehouse and buy stuff off the shelf. Everything is purpose-built by ourselves, because there is no one else who does what we do. And then just recently, we've made huge advances in our safety techniques. We've had huge help from your safety department, from Marishni in Johannesburg and her team. And we've tried to streamline the safety aspects for humans and also for the elephants, which has been part of the whole planning process. So a lot had to be done before we could physically do this operation. So a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how the operation works. We use an immobilizing drug called M99 is the common name. It's an opioid, so it's the same family as morphine. The only difference is it's 10,000 times stronger than human-grade morphine. So we need the strength of drug to be able to dart and immobilize an elephant. The downside of it is it's seriously toxic and lethal to humans. So we do carry an antidote with us. Most of our team do, kind of trained to deal with in case of an accident. Touch wood, we've never had to actually physically treat anyone. Everyone's really careful when they work with it. But we make up specific doses for specific size animals, and they go, if you look in the picture, you will see some single-use darts. They've got really long needles, about as long as my finger. Elephants have thick skin, so you need to get into the muscle mass. And we load these darts with specific doses for specific size animals with a tranquilizer, and they are then fired from a dart gun from the air to be able to mobilize these elephants. So a helicopter is a key part of of our arsenal. We can't do this job without a helicopter. So on a typical day at Venetia, we would get airborne with a helicopter, and we don't know where the elephants are, so we have to look for them. It's a big landscape. Once we've found the elephant, our focus is on finding a cohesive family group. So by that I mean literally from the great-grandmother right down to the tiniest baby, and we catch and move those elephants. So if there's the family is 7, we move 7. If there's 15, we move 15, and we make sure that we catch each and every one of those individual animals. And the reason why we do this is it helps enormously with the success and the adaptation in the new reserve, in this case a NAV, and also they have strong social bonds with each other. So we use this to our advantage when we catch them. We want them to go down in as small an area as possible because it just helps with our loading and with our recovery technique. So as I say, when the helicopter gets airborne, it will then push these elephants to an area where we can work. We need to access the area with big trucks and our ground team. So they will slowly work, something similar to a sheepdog working with sheep, slowly work them to an area where we can work, and then the whole darting process will work. And how this works, it's actually a phenomenal thing to watch. It happens really quickly. The pilot and the vet need to know each other intimately. Each one needs to know the other one's move. They can't think or question. They need to just get into it and support each other. They always start with the matriarch, so you'll be flying at probably 300 or 400 feet, pushing the elephants. Once they're in the area, you will literally drop down to probably about 20 or 30 feet above from the ground, treetop level, literally, and flying at about 20 knots, which you need to be close to be able to dart them. So literally the length of this room is the distance away you need to be from an elephant from the air. And then they'll dart the matriarch, and then as quickly as that happens, the helicopter will turn immediately to try and keep them in this area, because you might be working in an area the size of a football field, the only area that's sort of semi-open in a big landscape. Turn, keep them in that area, and as quickly as possible, you will try and dart from the biggest to the smallest, because it's important that they all go down together and in the same place. And it happens quickly. I mean, I've timed it on my watch. Sometimes it's one every 15 seconds. So as the helicopter's turning, the vet is leaning over. He's finding, now remember, he's got 5 or 6 different doses for different size animals, sticks it in the breech. As he looks up, he's on the next animal, puts the dart, you turn immediately. If you get airsick, it's not a job you want. So in that way, these elephants are darted in literally a couple of minutes. Once they are all darted, the helicopter will probably fly to a height of about 100 feet to try and keep them in this area, and it takes probably about 5 minutes or 6 minutes before they're going down. And this is the scene you should see, is that the elephants are beautifully darted in the rump. At this stage, I can tell you that if the veterinarian misses an elephant, he has to buy beers for the rest of the team that night, because it is, after all, the largest land mammal on the planet. So this combination of these toxic drugs, elephants, low-flying helicopters, it really does make for a very interesting day at work, I must tell you. So once the elephants are all down, we need to be close at all of this. So we're in constant radio communication with the aerial team. They will tell us if there's a crisis. So we need to be sort of 50 meters away, 100 meters away from where all of this is happening. And the scary thing is that probably 20% of all the elephants that we catch are in some sort of immediate peril. So we need to intervene within a minute at the latest to be able to mitigate some sort of situation. And this picture speaks 1,000 words, it really does. Elephants have an amazing physiology. They cannot breathe through their mouths. They can only breathe through their trunks. Most people don't know that. So if you constrict that trunk in any way, it suffocates and it dies. They cannot lie on their chests too, because unlike us, who our lungs are, most mammals' lungs are free-floating in our chest cavities, elephants' lungs are connected to their chest walls with connective tissue, and it's an adaptation from way back when. But when they're lying on their chest, they cannot open the chest to be able to breathe and build up this negative pressure. So what happens if an elephant's on its chest, sternal recumbency as we call it, they will slowly die and it will eventually perish. So we need to be there quickly to get an elephant on its side if it's lying on its chest. And in this particular photo, there are four things that are happening. So one is on its chest. We need to get it on its side as quickly as possible. there is one big elephant about to fall on its calf, which would mean the end of that calf if it did. And then another elephant is standing on a calf's trunk and it can't breathe. So there are three things. And all of that, there are two totally awake elephants there. Totally awake, 4, 5, 6 meters away from you. So and every situation is different. There is not one. We are learning the whole time. It's something akin to being in a battle. You just don't know what variables are going to be thrown at you. You have to think quickly, you have to act, but also somehow try and keep your cool when you're doing all of this. It's a lot of people lose their heads when they do this, but you have to be there and you have to make a difference. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of dead elephants, and that's not it's not the outcome that we want. So, although we don't want to be in there because it obviously exposes us to awake elephants, but at the same time, if we're not there, the elephants could die. So this is the conundrum that we are faced with on a daily basis, and we have the most amazing, passionate crew of people who do this, who live for these elephants, literally, and without them, none of this would be possible. So once these elephants are down, and those of you who have been lucky enough to be there, you'll see after all of this chaos, there's dust, helicopters, turning elephants over, all this sort of crisis. There's an unbelievable calm that kind of comes over the situation, and you can hear the elephants breathing, everything's stable, and there's an energy that I can't explain to you that you kind of feel being in amongst all these big beasts. It really is incredible. It's very, very humbling. So those of you who have seen it will understand what I am talking about. So we will then collar normally the matriarch. I'll explain to you why now. So we'll collar the matriarch. We do any treatments that we need to do at this time, and then any research too that we weigh them, we measure them. We try and age and sex them so we know what we are sending, and then we will start loading them into our purpose-built crates. I know I can see the reactions on your faces, most of you. It looks absolutely terrible, but it really is a technique that we have learnt by accident, actually, and it has become best practice. We lift the elephants up by their feet upside down with endless slings. There are absolutely no side effects, I can assure you. We've moved about 1,800 elephants using this technique, and to date have not had any issues or lost any elephants because of this technique. It makes it more efficient. As I say, it doesn't look great, but it really, really is best practice and the best way that we do it. So, as I said, we'll weigh all the elephants too with an electronic scale. We need to know what each truck weighs, and then we'll load these elephants with the high-up cranes we have straight into the tailor-made wake-up crates, and we'll load big and small alike in these containers. Now, I was explaining to David earlier that 5 years ago, it took us a whole day to catch one family group of elephants, 8 or 10 or 12 elephants. It was a long day's work, but we would do it. This whole technique, it's advanced, we've innovated, it's changed enormously to a point where we are now comfortable catching 25 to 30 elephants in a long morning, which is significant, or certainly for us, knowing what the challenges were. So we've had huge strides and advances, and we are still working on it and trying to streamline it so that we can do it quicker and better, because it's all about time efficiencies for us. The longer the elephants are down, the more at risk they are. So we want to, within half an hour, 40 minutes, we want to have all those elephants in that box and have them awake. And once we've loaded them into these wake-up modules that we've designed, we will then give them a reversal drug to reverse the immobilizing drug I told you about. Luckily, they have big, thick thumbs, about as thick as thick veins, about as thick as your thumb, and it's quite easy to give them an intravenous injection, and literally within minutes they get up. And interestingly, elephants only have a reverse gear for some reason or other. I don't know why, but so we try and load them backwards, that when they get up, they move straight into our wake up, into our transport module. And we load the cows with their tiny little calves all together. We don't want to separate them at any point, because obviously we're worried about stress. So we'll wake the calf up immediately. It will get up before its mother, and within a minute, that mum wakes up and the first thing it does is it looks for its calf. It's the only mammal that I know that does that other than humans. You can do this to a rhino, an impala, a giraffe. They couldn't care about their children once they've been immobilized. But elephants really are senescent animals. They're different, you know. I mean, if you'd said this to me 15 years ago, I would have said you're talking nonsense. But the more I work with them, the more I realize they are different. They really are at a different level. And it's very evident when we do this. As they get up, that mum gets the calf, puts it between its legs, and it makes sure that it's safe, and it walks back into the transport module. It is, I can tell you without a doubt, it's the best part of my whole day. But so once they're in the transport container, this is a scene that you would see they are all together. And as I explained to you, it's key to us that we have a whole family, from the oldest to the youngest, all together. They can see each other, they can smell each other, they can touch each other. And that goes a long way towards relieving the stress, not only for the journey, but certainly for the adaptation in their new home. So we'll give them the once over, and then we'll tranquilize them with 3 different tranquilizers. And interestingly, they are all tranquilizers that are used in human medicine, mostly for schizophrenic patients. We've just adapted them for use in animals, and they work incredibly well. There's a short-acting one, works for about 3 hours, one that works for about 7 or 8 hours, and then there's one that works for up to 5 days. And all it does is it relieves anxiety. They're totally awake, they can see, they can run, they have all their senses, but it just takes the load off. And something akin, I would think, I've never taken a Xanax, but something that you would expect when you take a Xanax. You can still run, see, but it just kind of lightens the load and just makes it the whole process more streamlined, and the adaptation and the transport too. So then the journey, which is give or take about 1,000 miles to Zenav, across an international border, which is a massive challenge. But obviously with the pre-planning and pre-clearing, we limited it to about an hour on the South African side and 2 hours on the Mozambican side. And all in all, probably about a 48-hour journey to Zenav. And the last 200 kilometers is the most challenging. We're taking 50-ton rigs on little sand tracks in forest. So a massive challenge, and that takes about 10 hours, that last little bit. So when they arrive there, we get them straight off a ramp, just a release ramp. They're all together. We make sure that, obviously, that the ramp is close to food and water. And if you saw those elephants a day or 2 days after them being offloaded and they're feeding in the bush, you would think that those elephants have been there their whole lives. A lot of the stress is eliminated with the use short-term with the drugs, and long-term just by having everyone together. And I was listening to the story of the one group of elephants that was offloaded at Zenav on the first week. When the other lot came on the second week, the other elephants were waiting for them. And the fact that the second lot of elephants saw the first lot of elephants, they didn't want to get out the truck. They got out immediately and chatted to the elephants in elephant. And the more of them we move, the easier it becomes for the ones. So, I mean, you can just imagine packing up and moving your family to one place. If you're the first one, it's quite tricky. But if everyone else is arriving, you say, hey, I know you, I know you, I know you. And it just makes it easier. And they all know each other, and makes for a successful translocation at the end of the day. So the collars that we put on during, when the elephants are all lying down, we will put one collar per group. And it has a satellite function, so you can in your office kind of look and find out and see where they are in a general area. And then they also have a VHF function, so you can use a radio tracker and get right to the elephant. So this is obviously done for obvious reasons, to see that the elephants are all right and to see how they're adapting. And I'm happy to report that there have certainly been a few births since last year, which in itself tells us that it has been a successful operation. So in this way, we moved, I think, 101 elephants last year and this year alone. So by doing this, I think we've shown that it can be done at scale, and more importantly, that it can be done over distance. But all of this is really, really expensive. It takes a lot of money to do an operation. There's helicopters, trucks, logistics, and I can only say that De Beers certainly has stepped up to the plate in terms of not only gifting these elephants to the government of Mozambique, but also fully funding this whole operation, and absolutely amazing. So my hope is that other corporates follow your lead, because I really do feel that this is a pivotal moment in history. We hope other corporates see what you are doing to not only protect habitat, but also to protect species. And I think we can be secure in the knowledge that 10 years from now, there will be a happy, thriving population of elephants in Zenave, not only for the benefit of the park, but certainly for the benefit of the people of Mozambique. And none of this would be possible without all of your help and without De Beers' help. And thank you very much for making a difference. Thank you.
So much, Kester. We're just going to show a quick animation that gives you a little bit of the facts about moving giants, and then Kester and I will do a bit of Q&A.
We are taking around 200 elephants from one reserve in South Africa and moving them more than 1,000 miles to a national park in Mozambique. It's basically a huge elephant road trip, which sounds like a pretty ridiculous thing to do, unless you understand why we're doing it. This is Moving Giants. Our story begins in Venetia Limpopo Nature Reserve in South Africa, which is suffering from a unique problem: too many elephants. Elephants are massive, and while their presence disrupts the ecosystem in ways that are positive, when you go over carrying capacity, this disruption turns into destruction, ruining the lands for all the flora and fauna, and in the end, making it inhospitable for elephants themselves. This is where we get to a guy named Pete. He works for De Beers Group, which owns and takes care of the Venetia Limpopo Nature Reserve. Pete wanted to save these elephants from themselves and all the other plants and animals they unintentionally put at risk. So he set out to find a new home for the 200 too many elephants. But while almost everyone in the world loves elephants, it's hard to find a place that can protect and provide for 200 of them. Pete had to think outside of the box. He reached out to the folks at Peace Parks Foundation, a nonprofit working with the Mozambique government to rewild the country. Mozambique suffered from a 2-decade civil war that killed about 1 million people and wiped out most of the wildlife. Without the big 5 animals to attract safari tourism, Mozambique is struggling economically to bounce back from the devastation of war. Elephants are a keystone species. They pave pathways through thick vegetation and spread seeds through their dung, which diversify the landscape and provide nutritious food for smaller animals to thrive on. So let's recap. We've got one reserve where the elephants are threatening their own destruction, and a national park that can't recover from a dark past without elephants to help bring it back to its former glory. And that is where Moving Giants comes in. We're a partnership between De Beers Group, Peace Parks Foundation, and the governments of South Africa and Mozambique. And we are on an unprecedented mission to save 200 elephants and 2 ecosystems, to help the people of Mozambique by bringing training, tourism, and jobs back into the equation. And this story is only just getting started. Like Moving Giants to follow along.
Thank you. What an amazing story. Kester, would you join me on the stage and we'll do a few Q&A. I hope you're as excited by that as I was. What an amazing story and what an amazing tale you told us. I'm sort of intrigued by watching you. Is how did you actually get into this business of moving animals, elephant, rhino, etc.?
Well, obviously, I had a love of wildlife as a youngster. You know, people like David Attenborough had a huge influence on my life. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't know that, but he did. And I've been lucky enough that after having studied, that I started moving animals from an early age, from 22, and I've been self-employed since that time, moving animals all around Africa. So I've been doing it my whole working life and love it.
Brilliant. You did speak quite a lot about safety, but as you'll know, safety is something that's very close to all of our hearts at De Beers. Perhaps you could spend a minute just telling us how you go about thinking and planning the kind of relocation and the safety aspects. And lots of those things are familiar to us, like people working at heights and rigging machines, but a lot of stuff completely novel to De Beers, like the risk of an elephant falling on you. But really, a lot of planning goes into this. Do you want to just talk us through a little bit how you go about thinking about that?
A lot of working parts in our operation and a lot of unpredictable factors. We don't know what elephants are going to do. We don't know where they are going to be, but there is a certain amount of planning that one can do. And actually, De Beers has had a big influence on us, helping us just trying to get our safety procedures in place. We are pretty much the only people, I think, on the continent or the planet that catch elephants at scale, and we can't go to the pub afterwards and talk to a friend and say, how was your day, and how do you try and solve this problem? We try and figure it out ourselves, and we're literally a small team of people. So it's great when we have somebody like yourselves who puts safety as a priority, assisting us in trying to make what we do better and safer, not only for people but also for the elephants. So to answer your question, we have implemented a few things with your help, which will make our going forward make it far safer for us and for the elephants. Thank you.
Great. Should we check if there are any questions in the room, and then we'll go to some of those that are coming in on the wires. Anybody in the room with a question? Matt will give you a mic. Shall we just go to some of those? These come in by the Kester, by how popular they are, how many people vote in favour of them. So first one for you is, how will the elephants be protected against poaching in Zanav?
Well, as I said to you, Peace Parks Foundation manage Zanav National Park. So they have boots on the ground. They have people there. They have trained rangers. It's a continuing process. They're constantly adding people to their ranger team. And they are there every day to make sure that these elephants are safe. And they've been there for the longest ones for nearly 2 years now. They have not had an incident. And of course, the Anglo-American Foundation has funded part of this training, and I think it is working and paying dividends so far.
I think for those of you who know the scourge of poaching in all over Africa, not having an incident for a year is a great achievement. So, it's wonderful
to put it in context, there are about 30 to 40,000 elephants that are killed every year across the continent.
Next question. It must be disorienting for the elephants going to sleep in one location and waking up in a strange and different environment. How have the elephants reacted or settled in so far? Have there been some who haven't taken to their new location, and how are they helped to settle in?
So all of the elephants have actually settled well in their environment, and I mean this is evident by the fact that, one, they haven't left their home. They like it there. There's lots of resources, more than where they were. The fact that they're all together has mitigated this risk, and I think the evidence that there have been some calves born is significant, and for me that is the measure of the success of the operation.
Next one, is there a plan to replicate this to other endangered species like rhino? Well, you can talk a bit about other species you've moved elsewhere.
Yeah, so rhinos are very different to elephants, obviously, but in terms of the translocation, they don't have the same social systems and bonds that elephants have. So generally we move them individually. So it's easier on the one hand, but more tricky on the other, and trying to build a population of them. So we do know that rhinos are under siege. They're also being poached at a massive rate for their horns. There are projects in place to rehome some rhinos. We have fairly recently, over the last few years, taken quite a few to Botswana, to the Moremi. It seems to be successful. But I don't think, in truth, that we could actually do it at the scale that we could do elephants. Because one, there's an excess of elephants in southern Africa, and there's actually not a massive excess of rhinos. But I do believe in not having all your eggs in one basket. I think it is important to spread them to other protected areas, and even off the continent, to be honest. There are projects trying to take some to Australia and other places, which sounds sad, but I do actually agree with it, just for the preservation of the species itself.
On the grounds that you'll move them back one day if we need it, or keep them there?
That is the hope, that one could eventually, whether it will ever happen or not, at least you have the species. If you if you compare the northern white rhino, for example, where there are only 2 left, there's 2. They're doomed. So there are projects in place trying to do embryo transplants to try and bring them back. But when you only have a handful of animals, you're limited, and there are no possibilities. Where we are at the stage where we can still move quite a few, which could hopefully help towards the future of these animals going forward.
Next one's on the Botswana hunting ban. If you don't mind, I'll answer that the way I answered when I get asked it around the world, because I'd like to then return to moving giants, because it's really about moving giants today. But just to take the question is, what do you think about the recent lifting of the hunting ban in Botswana? I get asked that question quite a lot as I travel around the world, and my answer is always the same. Firstly, I think that's a question for the people of Botswana, not just the government, but all of the people of Botswana. Secondly, I know Botswana and I know the country well, and I can say with confidence that it is a deeply consultative country, and that any decision that Botswana makes, including this one, has been made after decent, proper consultation. And the third thing I say, although as I say it's really not a question for De Beers, it's a question for the people of Botswana, is the facts speak for themselves, of course. There are 130,000 elephants in Botswana, which is 1/3 of the population of Africa, a country the size of Spain. Sounds like it's a pretty safe place to be an elephant. And what I always end with is to say that if I was an elephant, I'd probably choose to go to Botswana. Let's return to moving giants, Kester. Do elephants have a homing instinct? And if so, will they try to return to where they came from?
It's actually quite a complicated question, but in short, yes, they do have a homing instinct. But the fact that they have settled at Zanav, the habitat is good, and they're there with all their family members, I doubt strongly that they will ever attempt to come back. And the fact that if they were to do that, they would do it literally in the first 24 hours, 48 hours of having arrived there. But I think what changed, when the first elephants were moved 20 years ago and 15 years ago, you would catch a few elephants out of each group because it took so long. It didn't make sense to catch family groups at that stage. You caught the younger animals, they were just easier to load. And at that stage, there were lots of issues. Those elephants spent days running up and down areas looking for essentially their lost family members. They never settled. Sometimes it took years and years before things changed and before these animals settled down. And in keeping these cohesive groups together, moving them together, certainly mitigates the risk of them ever wanting to leave. And to be honest, they are in a 40,000 acre area as we speak. There's another nearly 1 million acres surrounding that. So if they haven't left the 40,000 acres and not gone into the 1 million acres, I mean, the chances of them ever wanting to leave there, unless anything significant happened, is very, very slim.
Another interesting question, how will the elephant translocation impact local communities in Zanav?
So this is probably a question for Peace Parks, but I think I can answer on their behalf. I mean, part of this introduction is not only for the park itself, but it's also for the local communities. And when the whole park structure and the ecosystem is up and running and where it should be, there will definitely be benefits for the surrounding communities. The hope is to bring ecotourism back to the area as it was 30 years ago, and they're hoping that this will impact on the local communities. But not only that, I know that certainly in terms of their agreement, part of the money that the park earns goes back to the communities. I think it's 30% of habitat.
20%.
20%, whatever it is. So whatever income they get through ecotourism or any other thing that they do in the park has to go to the community. So although it might seem like a small and insignificant thing to some people, just moving 100 elephants, it can long-term have a big impact on the local communities.
And going back to what I said right at the beginning about our Building Forever strategy, this is very much part of that. It's not just about protecting the natural world, it's also about communities and making communities more sustainable. So the fact that 20% of the profit is put back into the communities, the fact that jobs will get created as a result of the reserve, these are positive things, net positive things for us and for our work with communities. Another question, I think probably for me, is De Beers thinking about replicating this model to help other southern African countries where we operate with their elephant overpopulation, example Botswana? Well, I think at this point, it's a big enough job just to move 200 giants from Venetia to Zenov and other places in Mozambique. We certainly have spoken a great deal with our partners in Botswana about options for what they should maybe do given the significant overpopulation of elephant there. But again, it would be presumptuous of us to be making real suggestions there. We'll help in any way we can, but that's an issue, as I said earlier, for the government and the people of Botswana to solve. Very happy to help in any way we can. Kester, how are the families of elephants to move chosen? Is it based on fertility, age, family size, or is it random? Another very good question, actually.
Well, I wouldn't say it's entirely random, but there are two factors we look at. If we see an obviously senescent animal that we know will just battle on the trip, then we will leave that group. Or an obviously tiny, tiny newborn calf, we will also leave that group. So we will pick a group semi-randomly, as it were. We'll obviously have a look over them before we catch them, and if we feel they are all good candidates for a translocation, then we'll catch the entire group. So there are some factors that we look at. We don't want to move old or too young animals.
Maybe just time for two more questions. Let's take one from the screen. What measures, you've actually answered this to an extent, but it'd be good to get your full answer on this. What measures have been put in place to protect elephants from poaching in Zenov? Fences are not enough. What can be done to adequately address the tensions between conservation efforts versus preservation of community well-being, including economic opportunities? I mean, to an extent you've answered that, and of course that is the million-dollar question, but maybe you
Sure.
just want to...
Yeah, I think it's one of the ongoing conundrums in conservation. You know, how do you balance preserving or looking after this natural system and communities on the outside? And I mean, it's obviously now the community need to have some sort of benefit out of it, but generally good fences or having good security goes for a long way towards making good neighbors. So if the community have respect for the park has respect for the community. And in many areas where parks are taken over, and I've seen this many, many times, there is sometimes conflict or a difference of opinion or ideas in the early years of a park just because people have been totally reliant on the park before. But at some stage you have to put your foot down and say this area is to be preserved, it's for the animals, but at the same time you also need to make a difference in the communities. Clinics, economic opportunities, all of these things are key to a really good relationship between a protected area and an area surround. There's no ways you can just have a free-for-all where people can take the resources from a park. There just simply aren't enough. You know, they would consume or use every resource in a park in a very, very short space of time. There would be nothing left. So it's all about balance between community and the actual park itself.
Very similar in a way to the community strategies we have around mines, was how do you make communities more sustainable beyond the life of a mine, but in a sustainable way, not in a way that's necessarily short-term and then doesn't sustain itself. Can I just check if there's a question maybe in the room, and then I'll ask Kester one more question. Anyone in the room? So I'm sure you have many of these, but what is your most exciting moment in your history of translocating?
I've done some crazy things before, but I think probably the most fulfilling thing for me and leave excitement out of it is to actually go back to a park 5 or 6 or 8 years later and see the difference that you'd made. So you might have moved 100 elephants, for example, and you go back 10 years later and there's 300. That to me is, it's what keeps me alive and keeps me going. I mean, there's obviously the excitement of the job when you're doing what you're doing and all these challenges and that, but the ultimate fulfillment really is to see the long-term success of what happens in these parks. And I must say it's a great feeling.
Great stuff. We've come to the end of the hour we've got, ladies and gentlemen. Can I, first of all, thank very much Kester for taking the time to come and to talk us through this amazing story. It's so inspiring for me and so inspiring for all of you, and a real pioneer of the new world we live in. So Kester, from all of us, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Cheers.